Yeah.
Okay, I think we're live. Go ahead, Kofi.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the second session of the second annual, or maybe semi-annual, hybrid live coding interface. In the first session, we were privileged to hear about people, how they use live coding to explore the world. But in the second part, we're going to do something that's very close to live coding, and that's journaling, because we always see the code, the music, the visuals that people put on, but what is behind that? What is the thought process? What is the feeling? And that's what journaling is about. And then I wrote some words that is really compresses everything we're going to be hearing today. Live coding usually has the code shown, but what occurs before, during, and after the code loads? What chronicles can be documented? What relics events from the past can be reflected upon? How does self-expression intertwine with the lines that are written with the screen? When this stop being a solo endeavor and become a team activity? And that's what journaling can or cannot be. And our guests today, ranging from Arden to Thor to Sarah, Kate, Melly, and to finish it off with Dominic, will be exploring such things. So first up right now, we would have Arden going on, and I hope y'all enjoyed it. And you can ask questions on the YouTube chat in between the speakers. We will have a Q&A session, and in the end, we're going to have a panel discussion as well. Take it away, Arden.
Okay, thank you, Kofi. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Hello, everybody. I am Arden, for those of you who don't know me. I'm a researcher and I'm a musician from Italy. And I recently graduated in electronic music at the Conservatory of Trento. And if I'm able to share my screen, I would like to talk about you. Do you see my screen? I hope yes. Yes. I assume yes. Perfect. I'm talking about improving awareness of the musical form in a live coding performance using an autobiographical approach. I want to start with a quote by Magnusson, who say, "We do not study each other's pieces." So how to improve awareness in live coding context when pieces basically disappear short after they've been performed? I decided to come up with two visualization approaches to be used in my daily practice, which can help me in better understand what I'm doing my rehearsals. Before to start, I would like to give you a little bit of background. I would like to introduce you a few key concepts which I think that can be useful to better understand what I'm talking about. The high customization of systems and the strong coding approach, which is basically writing code from scratch, which is the approach that I also use, place the live coding practice within the context of oral tradition, where almost by definition, the attention is focused more on the now and less on the before. Moreover, this concept of idea to code latency, so the time window that occur between the formulation of a musical idea and its formalization in the form of code, and the existence of at least two kind of feedback, the first one regarding code and the second one more similar to the traditional ACI kind of feedback, are the two main factors that, in my opinion, further complicates the understanding of of the formal development in real time and in the long run. Secondly, regarding audio-video relations, it's important to highlight that code has been defined as the best form of notation for live coding practice, but nevertheless, visual have also been used in live coding context. In this sense, according to Purcell, we can define two main macro categories of visuals: the aesthetic ones, which aims at creating engagement with the public, and the didactic ones, which aims at understanding what's happening. And my system are belonging to these second categories. There are a few examples. I cited here the trinoscope and the didactic pattern visualizer. Talking about the design, I started from a kind of oversimplified version of the live coding environment that I typically use while performing. I started by classifying all the audio events that my system is capable of in categories based on their audio characteristics. And I've assigned to each of these categories a specific shape and a color based on their musical function within the economy of the piece. And then I mapped a few audio parameters to the corresponding graphic parameters. Then I've come up by imagining the two visualization approaches, which I call timex and timeZ. The timex approach is similar to the traditional notation, so the graphical objects are arranged following a pointer from left to right and up to bottom within a certain number of steps. While in the timeZ approach, the objects are arranged by categories, so in 6 different areas of the screen, and they are overlapping one on the other, as in a way that the less recent object tends to gradually disappear in the background. So with the first approach, I can at any moment visualize the whole development of my piece, while with the second approach, I can only visualize the latest 50 seconds, more or less. For implementation, I used a script implemented by Andrea Bertagnoli, which a plugin which allows you to run p5.js scripts directly in the text editor I use, which is Atom. And here's how the timex approach looks like, just an example. And here's how the timeZ approach looks like. After I implemented the two approaches, I proceeded with their evaluations. And I followed these steps. So I used each system for 5 sessions of 20 minutes each. And after each session, I create a few diaries using post-overthrow and think aloud techniques. Then I operate a thematic analysis over these diaries, and finally I compare the results. Regarding the comparison, to sum up a lot, it emerged that both approaches actually help me in being more aware of the overall music development, but with a few differences. Regarding the understanding of the musical form, the first approach has been, of course, more useful in visualizing the musical structure in its entirety, while with the second, I had more detail on the single categories in a nearest time window. This difference is basically maintained in regard of implementing development strategies. So in the first case, I've came up with reprises and variation of pre-existing materials, while in the second approach, these strategies have been applied to specific connection, creating a more local musical development. Both approaches suggest me new musical ideas and contributed at undermining a series of procedural automatisms that I had. And finally, regarding the musical outcome, with the timex approach, I've obtained clearer but quite simple and repetitive pieces, while on the contrary, with the timeZ approach, I've obtained pieces that are more various and interesting overall. In conclusion, the purpose of this presentation is not to provide a closed system to be immediately used by everyone, but to use this system, these approaches, as a probe to reflect on awareness of musical structure. And I wanted to leave you by paraphrasing Magnusson in a kind of provocative way with this question. Should we somehow study our pieces? And the answer, in my opinion, of course, is yes, even if I'm probably biased by my background in contemporary Western music. I think that borrowing this kind of analysis techniques from written music can really help we as live coder in better understand our musical acts. and in being more aware of when, how, and why we want to intervene in our dialogue with the machines, and even in improvisation context. So here are the references used in this presentation, and thank you a lot. Here's my email, and I'm really curious to know your opinion about it. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much for that, Arden. That was very good. If there's questions in the chat, speakers, you can put it in the Zoom link. And for those that are watching, you can put it in the YouTube chat. I would like to first ask a question. So, when we're live coding, we are already translating our thoughts and our feelings into code, right? So what do you think, but with your process, can we not say that like you're doing a double translation where not only are you translated into code, but you're also trying to translate it into a system that you're going to go back studying? So what do you think about that potential redundancy, but not redundancy in a bad way, but a redundancy that like you were saying, studying your piece? How has that affected your live coding practices that you're going through these different levels of iterations?
Yeah, so in my personal opinion, of course, I found these approaches very useful. I didn't use them for so much because I've implemented them kind of 2 months ago, more or less. But for the little time that I use them, I've noticed kind of more awareness, and I'm kind of more conscious on what to do and how to manage all the musical development. So how to build up your pieces step by step, of course using code, and of course interact, and of course improvise. And don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying that I'm started with a specific idea, or I written some code and beforehand, but it's just a kind of mental strategies that you can apply, that you are aware of. And studying your pieces, you're basically seeing that when it comes to it, I mean, it's happened a lot that you perform something that you're not so satisfied about. At least at me, for me, it happens a lot. And to be more conscious, to be more aware on why and when and how you are performing specific ideas, and where you are insert them into the musical dialogue, I think that can lead to, at least in my opinion, to a better musical understanding, and to better performance, and to better actual music. That's why I'm doing music, so I'm really interested in it.
That's very interesting. So there's a comment in the chat. One comment that you had is like someone really loved the framing of this helpful redundancy. And now you got a couple questions. One of them is, do you think this reflection has changed your practice in a noticeable way?
Yeah, definitely. As I've already said, maybe I didn't explain me very well, but I tried. But definitely, I've found that these things it's interesting that after I started using this system, I can manage the duration of my performance better than before, really better than before. So all the structures, all these sections are more well balanced between them, and I finished the performance right after when of course you have 20 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that. And I before to use the system, I didn't finish right. Just a little bit before or a little bit after or something like that. And so this kind of be more aware of the time, it's maybe the more interesting thing that I've noticed by using them.
And it's
but
very
also other things.
Sorry, it's very interesting that you ended with that, because the next question is, someone asks, how can you study video live coding performance? Because we're talking about musical, right? Musical, we're talking about duration, but since our whole lives we're always taught to like think visually, how would you say like this can be applied to studying visual live coding?
So, difficult question. I mean, the idea of these two systems is not to provide a kind of visual to be used in performance, but just as a tool for your personal study. I mean, of my personal study. So I didn't talk as much about how to study this in a kind of visual way, but of course, since graphic is more easy to interpret and more fast, maybe, of course, if you are kind of used to. I think that using this kind of different form of representation can really help you in better understand the code by itself. This is my personal experience, at least.
And it's a good one. I can understand that. And then for the last question, which is done by Alex, is when live coding, we are often associated with improvisation. So how do you define a piece in live coding?
Define.
That's well, I don't know. Alex is here, so maybe if you would like want to define the word define. But I think it's that notion of like, when normally people live code, like we're going improvisation. So how you said like how to end. Would you define that that's what your piece is in your now journaling practice, that now how long you're gonna go for?
No, basically when I start, I really like to improvise from scratch, because of course I have a few ideas, because it's kind of impossible not to have them. But when I start, generally I know, okay, my performance should start about 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that. And then I have a little timer or something like that. And then I simply go with the flow. But being aware of what you've done before and decide what to do next with a greater comprehension on what you've done before, in my personal experience, is the right way to do. I mean, when I started, I just write some code. Okay, it's funny. I listen. Because of course. But then when I started to be a little bit more skilled, I really have had this need to better understand what I'm doing and how I'm doing, and to actually learn by myself in a certain way. So don't know if I answered.
No, I think you answered your question. Thank you very much, Arden, for that. And then if there's other questions, we're going to get to that.
Yeah, sure.
But thank you very much for that. That was
Thank you a lot.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we are heading to the West Coast with Thor. So Thor, whenever you want to start, you can start.
Hello. Let me see if I can. Is my screen coming through correctly? Good.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you. Okay. Hi. My name is Thorsten Sideboard, and I've been developing my own live coding software called Soundboard for the past 5 years. Actually, I don't know if my audio is going to come through here. I'm going to restart this share just so I can share sound. Oh, where am I? Meeting. Sorry, I'm just going to restart this to share sound. And yes, this one. Coming through. Yes. I've been developing my own live coding software for the past 5 years. Quick demonstration here. So what makes it different from other live coding languages is the fact that it's more, the interface to it is more like a Unix shell rather than a text editor as the UI. And I've been giving some technical talks on it recently and doing some demonstrations. But for this, the conference here, the change now, thinking about ideas beyond the screen, there's two of the suggested prompts which spoke to me: imagination and world building. At the time, I'd just been reading this book on the left here, Kojo Eshan, More Brilliant Than the Sun, Adventures in Sonic Fiction. And it's wonderful, in which he weaves a wonderful history of Black electronic music, highlighting the science fictional mythologies around so much of the music. Top left here, we have Sun Ra, we have Underground Resistance, we have Goldie, the Lee Scratch Perry here. There's also Drexia, Parliament, Dr. Octagon, ton of different things. So it got me thinking about the role of mythology, the archetypes which embody principles we can aspire to, lessons we can learn from, but also the fun in creating our own myths, telling our own stories and creating narratives and fictions, seeing them come to life. And so for this lightning talk, I'm going to weave together a tableau of interesting stories, myths and mythologies, half-remembered truths and forgotten histories that led to creation and development of Soundboard as it is. So my first computer was a ZX Spectrum, and we'd sit and sort of type in sort of games for that badly. But it was around, this is around 86, 87. And shortly after that at school, we got like the BBC Micro, which also sort of text-based, this kind of terminal interface. So this is just sort of background, late 80s going into the early 90s. Fast forward a few years into the 90s, young 16-year-old in 1990, discovered raving, going out to sort of clubs, electronic music, Detroit techno, acid house, Sheffield bleep. There was this whole massive subcultural world which was like completely taking over the UK and the world at the time. So this was my life at the time, but I also had to get a job and sort of support this. So rather than going to art school, I managed to kind of bluff my way into doing like a technical job. So I was doing like DOS Windows support and like Novell network administration. So this is like, yeah, these are kind of parallel kind of universes, like going out techno, sort of raving, all these parties, but at the same time working with doing IT and sort of working with the terminal. And I didn't actually think these seemed so far from each other. Big book at the time was Neuromancer, which I'd read, and this kind of, I guess a couple of years later, I read this around 90 or 91. And I always associated this with like sort of, the only other person I knew who'd read it at the time was this guy who had a massive collection of Detroit techno. So I always kind of thought these were kind of parallel tracks, that sort of music and technology were pretty related. So that's all background. Around the mid 1990s, I moved out to San Francisco and got a job at Stanford Research Institute here. Partially by accident, I just needed a job, and I got a job as a sort of Windows technician, just doing pretty much what I'd been doing in Glasgow. But Stanford Research in itself is an amazing place. Here is where the mouse was invented, inkjet printing, LCD displays. It was the first connection on the internet between SRI and UCLA, was the first true internet connection. And one of the people who worked here prior to my time was this guy, Doug Engelbart. He had a system he was working on called the NLS online system. It was the first computer to use hyperlinks, windowing systems. He invented the mouse XY pointer system, which was on display in the lobby of SRI as well, raster scan video monitors. He did this awesome thing, the mother of all demos, 1968, running on a SDS 940 time-sharing computer. He basically did a video broadcast from Menlo Park to San Francisco, which is like 48 kilometers distant, scratch-built modem linking the video terminal, this showing the first time anyone had ever seen like a mouse and a windowing system and hyperlinks. And this was all like going over a scratch-built modem linking the demo terminal up to San Francisco. Slight aside, the guy, the video technician who was running all this, was this fellow on the left, Stuart Brand, who has been around forever and has fingers in so many pies. He was one of Ken Kesey's Merry Pranksters back in the day. He formed the Whole Earth catalog, which was like a pre-internet version of the internet on paper with all this alternative information. He also opened the first internet service in San Francisco, the Whole Earth Electronic Link, which had Bruce Sterling and a whole bunch of other people from Wired magazine were all part of that. And now he's doing the Long Now Foundation, doing sort of long-term thinking. But back to SRI, I was a sort of technician guy. Me and this other fellow, Chris, we had you can't really call it an office. It was a basement room It was a cupboard in a basement, basically, but that was where we stored our terminals. We'd sort of work on fixing other problems. I came back one Friday afternoon in 1997 and came down, and he, on his screen, he had a black terminal with a white cross. It was basically his mouse pointer. Anyone who remembers installing Linux back in the 90s and trying to get X Windows up and running. So that was Red Hat 4.2, 1997. And so that I kind of sat down and helped him. And this is how I sort of discovered Linux, and again, back into this terminal interface idea for it. So from Linux, this took me into so many other things. I got into like sort of networking, like doing Cisco firewalls. And of course, at that time, Linux, Apache, and Perl were like sort of just the lingua franca of the internet. So I started doing this Perl programming. This is my first kind of coding activities, writing automation scripts to log in, do monitoring and such. And so, yeah, this opened up a whole world to me, which of course leads back into sort of Unix itself. So this is Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie, who, Ken Thompson on the right, basically he invented Unix by itself, and Dennis Ritchie on the left helped heavily, but he also invented the C programming language. Another aside, the computer they're working on here is a PDP-11, which was massive. They were used everywhere, but Curtis Rhodes, who invented granular synthesis, his first implementation of granular synthesis ran on a PDP-11 back in 1974 as well. Here's the two fellows as well. Bell Labs Sensitive. These guys, so this wasn't from SRI, but the connection between these research institutes and like this room back here was very much like SRI as well. They just had cabinets of mini computers and mainframes, and they had all sorts of Unix, had IRIX, AIX, there was like Solaris, there was SunOS, a predecessor to SunOS as well. So very much got into this whole research mindset as well. I found a copy of this at SRI. This is actually my current copy. I think the one I had there was like pre-ANSI as well. So Unix terminal, the other, this is Plan 9 from outer space, another thing from like Bell Labs by itself. So precursor to all this, even more backstory here as well. So Ken Thompson and the birth of Unix, that actually came from a different other project called Multix, which was this multiplexed online operating system and a massive lofty goals from 1964, collaboration between MIT, General Electric, and Bell Labs. The idea behind it, they were inspired by the utility of telephone and electricity companies. So they actually had this vision of like a computing system as being a service that would get rented out. So Multix itself, so much of the modern day ideas that we have come from Multix, a shell, getting back to the shell sort of interface, user authentication, streams like output, redirection, file descriptors, even commands like ls and date, they come from Multix. So all this, all during the 90s, I still wasn't doing too much kind of creative coding of my own. I was going out, putting on record nights, like putting on live shows, DJing. However, a lot of the musicians from San Francisco at this time, all using Max MSP. It was like Kid 606, Kit Clayton, Timeline, Lesser, Matmos. So this time in the 90s, still very much involved. I had two parallel worlds. I had this still going out to electronic, interesting music. I was working in tech, doing sort of different coding things, but there were still parallel existences. .com crash, I had to move back to London, or move to UK, and I moved to London. Big influence on me here. Shout out to Alex. The forkbomb.pl, which Alex won the software arts, Ars Electronica software art in 2001. This was actually a massive influence on me. As this sort of small script, I'd been working in Perl, and to find out that, you know, this was almost like hearing punk rock for the first time or reading a Charles Bukowski poem. It opened up the mind that, oh, you don't actually need a computer science degree to actually do interesting sort of creative art. And so during 2000s in London, and I was working in warehouse spaces and running a record label. There was other things we got involved in here. This was a headphone festival and a lot of kind of creative hacking. Through the 2000s, I eventually kind of this was the inspiration for me for pulling all these things together, the idea of like live coding, and started sort of formulating this idea for my own. Moved back to SF in the 2000s, and this was the first live coding project me and a friend had. We were using Node. We had these Node.js scripts, which we had communicate via RabbitMQ, which was running as like a message server to synchronize us, so we could do sort of BPM type synchronization. And so this, I'm going to bring this now back to finish this up and tie in some of these sort of different mythologies and histories, forgotten histories. So 2015, eventually get started in this programming language. This is another, ties in with the Unix and C and all this kind of history. BCPL was a language which predates and has a massive influence on all of these. This fellow, Martin Richards, University of Cambridge, and he wrote this in 1967. BCPL is a basic combined programming language. Prior to that, there was a Cambridge programming language from the 50s or maybe the early 60s. And he basically sort of stripped it down and created this BCPL, which was actually a programming language designed for making compilers for other languages. BCPL in itself, it had a single data type. It was just a word, and other notable things from it. The braces style, which you think of as C style or like JavaScript style, the braces first came from BCPL. The double slash for comment line also comes from BCPL, which C didn't pick up at the time, but C++ later did. Hello World, that was the first time Hello World was actually written, was using BCPL as well. How this ties to Unix, so Ken Thompson, he had his Unix operating system originally written in assembler. He needed a systems language for further developing that. So he actually stripped down BCPL further and created a language called B. And he used that for a while. And when Dennis Ritchie then wanted a better, a more evolved programming language, he incremented B by 1, and that's how we get to C. So this is all by the wayside. One of my other projects I used to still do, like draw comic books. I had this idea for like a comic book, which was going to be like the X-Files for AI. It's in this future where general consciousness eventually becomes true, but it's in this early Wild West version of it, where you might get some student in a dorm actually creates like a working general intelligence AI. You might have these different pockets of AI popping up. So I had this idea like the X-Files, but for AI, where this shadowy organization would track down students or organizations who have like brought on the first real AI. And I wanted a name for this. I was thinking of Bureau, like FBI or so. But somehow the BCPL name came to me, and I thought about the Bureau for the Containment of Programmatic Life Forms. I kind of got started on this comic, and we have this Bertrand Russell-like character here, and like Miss Muir is based on John Muir, some other ideas here. But with my coding language, I'd started sort of writing code and making music for it, and I needed an artist name for my BandCamp. So I basically stole the BCPL name, and now my artist name is BCPL, and I have this BandCamp, which has a picture of Martin Richards here, but it is a Bureau for the Containment of Programmatic Life Forms. So this is one of these almost like fake history mythologies, which builds upon real forgotten histories and brings it back to my terminal, and it all kind of evolves through this history of Unix and this inspiration and mythology of Bell Labs and research. So I would love one day for Martin Richards to somehow discover this BCPL website and think, wait, that's not me. Why have I have a camp here? So this is a soundboard interface, and I'll kind of close out here with one interesting other aspect. There was one of the speakers from earlier today, from the first session. I've forgotten his name now here as well, Maxwell Neely Cohen. And I was looking over his papers, and he had a wonderful essay on this terminal green, which is certainly a big inspiration for me. So to wrap it up there, this is a history of BCPL, which is my soundboard evolution software with all these mythologies. So hopefully that makes sense.
Ooh, Tor, like you say mythology, but it's also, I feel like you took this journaling thing and imagining the world thing, and you also brought in like a genealogy, if that makes sense. Like, you know how like everyone, the craze now is like ancestry and me. It's almost like you did that through with your whole life coding like paradigm, where like you went through all the myths, all the stuff that made your language what it is to be. And that's one thing. So one question I have, and if anyone in this chat, you can go in the Zoom link, or you can even go on the YouTube and type your question. But my first question is, you know how you're looking back and you say it with all this excitement, like you relish the history. What do you think people will say about the history if they, like, let's say 100 years in the future, they see your life coding language? What do you think they will say about it?
100 years in the future, live coding language. I don't know if anyone will ever discover it again, if it'll be like some oddity there as well. Yeah, I don't know. I guess like more than the language, that maybe it would stand upon the music itself. I'm not sure how that will be looked back upon via history. It may be a minor footnote in there as well. We'll see if Martin Richards ever discovers it for himself. Yeah.
Let's see if there's anything. Okay, we have a question from Alex. How much of this mythologization is deliberate, premeditated, and how much is just making sense of things as they happen?
It's completely just making sense of things. It's more like just looking back upon the experiences I went through and how much of an impact they left. And interestingly, the soundboard, when it got started, I was starting a job where I was going to be working with C and C++. And so I'd always been aware of, I've known Alex from back in London, so I was kind of always aware. I was never part of the live coding or Perl, any of the sort of live coding scene. I'd known of the sort of Perl stuff, and I was aware that tidal cycles was being worked on. So it was more of an idea that was going on, but my initial implementation, the DAW that I worked with for years was actually Ableton Live. So like a lot of the metaphors and ideas for it, it became more of I kind of had this REPL interface, which was just kind of purely by accident. And I think it evolves because of that sort of Unix sysadmin background and always using a terminal. So much of it really is just making sense of it afterwards and like trying to condense that down into a story. There's always the first slide, actually a picture of the KLF there. I never actually spoke about, but they were one of the early inspirations of this whole mythologizing as well. I think it was one of the first books. It's either from Bad Wisdom or 45, one of the Bill Drummond books, where he talks about him and his buddies, and they would just make up these elaborate histories for like made up like Norse, like Norse heavy metal bands from like that never existed, but you have this whole mythology behind them. You invent this story. So some of it, yeah, very much just over weaving all that history together into a story.
Okay, yeah, and the next question that actually just came true is like you have also exhibit intent for future mythologies or mythologizations.
I think like mythologies, you kind of build your own mythology, and it's almost like sets a direction for where you want to go. You kind of imagine like what it could be, and that's the sort of mythology. I think it's like you imagine where you could take this idea, and like by allowing that, by having these ideas and like thinking the expanse of it, it gives you ideas for where you can go with this as well. So I think it sort of sets this framework for moving forward.
Yeah, see if there's gonna just see if there's any more questions, because while we wait for like probably one or two more questions, another question I had is that it's very interesting that, you know, like what, like let's like take Arden for example, you know, like it was very about like I'm like journaling myself and how my moods are. I just found it interesting that like where we have one that is a very humanistic approach, not saying that yours wasn't humanistic approach, but there was a lot of references to like we have to acknowledge the technologies that we're self-using, because the limitations or how we use the technology can further how we code or how we think about coding. And I don't know if you have anything else to say like that. Like you really looked at it from like, if technology, like, you know, like that saying, if the walls can talk. I felt like in your thing, it was like, if the wires, if the circuits can talk, this is how they would view themselves.
Like that kind of idea of like kind of looking on the code and the tools itself. Yeah, I definitely approached this talk differently from that viewpoint, but that's also like these are always just different aspects of your evolving practice, because I also the same, like looking back on the evolution of how the tools actually how you use the tools and how they allow you to sort of move forward, and the kind of constraints that they give you, or the challenges and the opportunities you get from the tooling itself. So very much other stuff I've considered, but definitely different from how I approached putting together this talk.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Oh, it's nice to, okay. And then one last thing before we go, I think that this is in the YouTube chat. Alex wrote, it's nice to think about live coding making up its own story as it goes, becoming a real living tradition. And I think your talk really did emphasize that like, even though this may not be new, or I'm not going to get into this, has this a new art form or this is old, but I think it's very interesting that like when we do think about how languages did come about, that it's not only the people, it's also the technology, also what they were interested in. So very interesting talk. If you guys come up with more questions, you can put them in the YouTube chat. Thank you very much, Thor. And that was, like I said, like I learned a lot about computing and the history. So thank you very much for that.
Cool, thanks so much. Lovely to be part of this. Like I'm looking forward to the rest of the talks as well.
Yeah. And up next, we have Melody, Sarah, and Kate. If y'all are ready, y'all can get on. And this is an interesting talk because it's like we went from the solo acts into like the group act. So now we went from like technology and self, and now we're getting into like how people come together. And because, you know, there is a misconception that coding is like an individual thing, that we all like individuals. We don't need to really talk to each other. We just have to like put GitHub merges and repos. And I do like that the next concept of this is like how there is that sense of community. There is that sense of like unity and fellowship. So I can't wait to hear about this. I will stop rambling and let you all get on though.
Thanks, Kofi.
Thank you. Can you all see my screen all right? Is it up? Cool, okay. So I guess we'll just get started with introducing ourselves. So hello, we are Cody, right? So I am Melody, and my bandmates are also here, Kate and Sarah. And so we're going to be talking about the Church of Cody. Yeah, we're going to talk about the Church of Cody. So to start the sermon right, Kate is going to discuss our Sunday rituals.
Yeah, so Cody is a live code band or collective. We kind of use those words interchangeably these days. And we have a pretty regular Sunday rehearsal, our Sunday ritual. So this is our church. For Melody and I, who are on the East Coast of the States, although in different cities, it's the morning. For Sarah, who's in Berlin, it's the afternoon into the evening when we meet. But it's always on Sundays for the most part. It starts with us texting each other like, hey, you good for today? I'm gonna go get some coffee. Then we sort of log in. We have a cloud server that we run Troop on, and we also have a Zoom link. We had to change our Zoom link for the first time in years recently because Sarah got a new job, but we've been doing Zoom from before it was cool. Once we have everything booted up, then we have a jam. These are really free. There's no set time. I mean, sometimes we're like, oh, I need to sign off in an hour. But most of the time we don't have a set time. They can vary greatly. We're really into the moment and just working in that moment. Yeah, there's a lot of freedom for repetition. You can suck in that moment. And we're here to experiment in our Sunday service. Then we finish, we wind down, we usually say, yeah, what felt good, what we hated. And then we say, until next time.
Yes. So to talk a little bit more about the technical setup, which Kate started to discuss a little bit, right? We use Troop, and to use Troop together, we access it via a server on a cloud because we are safe when we share each other. So when we log on and share each other some code to execute on our machines. Yes, nice and safe. And so what happens is, like, Troop is a collaborative tool for live coding, right? And so Kate and I use Sonic Pi to live code with each other. But what's also cool is that Sarah is also logged onto Troop and running Sonic Pi as well. So she is able to hear our output in real time. And that's what allows us to really like jam together pretty well from being, considering we're very far apart from each other. And then so on the visual side too, Sarah has her gear, her setup, La Habra, and so she shares her feed to us over Zoom.
So the deity of the visual. So one thing that's important about Cody in general is we have a visual, a member of the band who just does visuals, and that's like important to how we work, our identity, our aesthetic, is that there's a visual component to our music. We think about this in terms of rhythm, actually, and we'll talk more about rhythm on the next slide as well. But really in the visual, it's not about visualizing the sound. It's about collaboration with the visual, and that we uphold the visual as an equal part of this composition that's unfurling in real time. So there's a visual rhythm, there's visual frisson, there's visual memory, and all of this is happening while we're also making the sound. So we worship at the altar of the visual as part of our Sunday practice.
Yes. To talk a little bit more about this idea of rhythm, I'll discuss the deity of emergent rhythm. So for context, I'll talk a little bit more about rhythm analysis. Rhythm analysis describes relationships in terms of triads that are not traditional dialectic resolutions, but rather unresolvable balances between terms. So like past, present, future, possible, probable, impossible, things like that. And so in Kodi, we are kind of our own triad. We each provide our own rhythm. We are ever-changing beings that counterpoint against each other. It's not like a yin-yang type of situation or whatnot. We're just like existing, right? And so within our church, our individual rhythms combine to create interwoven compositions, which emerge in real time, which is something that's very characteristic of live coding in general, right? And so this output ends up becoming its own form of journaling, which allows us to reflect on the present to its contrast with the past, right? Like, we're outputting it and experiencing it and judging it the whole time. And so, like, thinking about our other deity, the deity of play, we're playing as a group. That's like a huge point of it, right? So like Kate and I are responding to Sarah's visuals through the music related to the deity of the visual, right? Kate and I also tend to respond to each other's output. So on the screen on the top right, you see a screenshot of some of the sonic pi code in Truth. And so something, a way that Kate and I will play with each other is that, we'll recycle or, pay attention to what each other is outputting. So like something, if Kate is using a sample, like in this example screenshot, she's putting out glitch bass G in the pink, right? Something I'm known for doing is to notice that and incorporate it into my own code and my own system. And to me, that's like part of, playing as an ensemble, thinking as like a musician, jazzy rules, but also just like kind of like a game for puzzles and patterns, right? Recycling the pattern or some material in any way. But we're also playing individually, right? So, in thinking about our time to suck, it's like our time to like try something else new. Like, somebody might bring a new gear or try out a new function. Sometimes we'll just literally have like the help file. I'll have the help file next to me, like trying to learn like a new technique in Sonic Pi because that's the only time I have is with them. But, we're playing music, we're playing rhythms, and we're also having fun. That's the deity of play. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and just
There. Sorry. Fun.
Yeah, and I guess to add to the idea of play too is, playing as a group is more fun and it does give you a lot more to respond to. It gives you, like anytime I feel stuck, I just look at Sarah's visual and I get a million ideas of where to go in terms of texture, what sample I might want to actually draw on next. There's so much richness in what she creates that it's like, I don't have to feel like I'm alone in this, like, need to come up with something, need to fill time. So that's an important part of the play as well, is the communal play. Yeah. And I also am excited to hear the gong song sound again, Melody. So go ahead.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for that. Thank you all for that. And we have some questions about attendance in the church. So is the Church of Cody a private session, or is the worship sessions allowed, like are people allowed to attend in the audience?
Yeah, so far it's always been private practice.
We did a stream once, Kate. We did do a stream once.
Yeah, that's right. But for the most part, we don't invite people.
Oh, it makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's not that like we did it once. It's not that we're objective. Like we wouldn't say absolutely not. It just doesn't happen.
We're not being programmed at like Sunday, 9:30 a.m. on the East Coast usually.
And chat, don't be afraid to ask questions to the deities of the Church of Cody. As you know, they talk in code, so don't worry about like any other thing. But and while we're waiting for questions from both chats, I have a question. So in the sermon of this church, what are some like, you know, ongoing themes? What is like the main theme of the sermon that y'all use?
Yeah, layering complexity is I think a really good one. Everything builds into layers of sounds, layers of shapes, layers of color, layer of timings. Yeah.
I would say too, like sort of like the liturgical calendar, if you're used to going to Catholic or I guess other Christian churches, I think it's a bit seasonal as well, which can be, you know, it is a healing ritual when like sometimes all of us just feel kind of shitty, and like to go and make like dark music and dark pictures for like the part of the year that fits with is also the right thing to do. And I think like sort of a part of the Church of Cody. So while we have the consistency of the layers, there's the sort of cyclical changes that I think are an important part of it too.
We have a question from Alex. How different does it feel compared to performing with an audience, right? Because I guess like performance has its own set of rituals, but like I guess when y'all are performing in this, I guess we can say safe space or safe haven or safe heaven, of course. How does that different from playing like in front of others?
It's way more chill. Like, especially like thinking about a space to mess up, even though, you know, we say in live coding, we're embracing more errors, you know, we're embracing our errors. I do feel like it feels less, since there's less risk, I will try out things more versus like in a performance, because the space allows for that.
If there's, okay, I'm gonna ask another question, so I might be hogging up questions, but if you have questions, please do ask. Another question: who leads these like sermons? Basically, would you say like you were saying, Sarah? Do you think it's like a seasonal thing, like where it's not maybe pre-planned? It depends on the mood, or would you say like y'all have like an order of like, okay, we're gonna lead this or that, or is it, or do you just take roles and accept the roles?
I don't feel like anyone is particularly leading, because the nice part about having a consistent rhythm and having that ritual pattern is that, you know, we're also freed from sort of deciding what we're going to do in a given day. We kind of know how a meeting is going to go. And so we can go in and chat a little bit and like get ready to go. And then we always start in a similar place, to say that like, we start in a fairly simplified place. So it will be like a flashing shape on our timer and some of the initial bleeps and bloops. I think sometimes they're even the same. Like there's a fairly similar structure, I think, that Kate and Melody start with as well. So it's nice because you don't have to make any decisions. And then from that point, everything else blossoms, that like it can go anywhere it's going to go from there. But we don't have to make choices until we're sort of all in the moment, and then we just go with the choices that are being made.
Okay. We have a question from Shelley. Where did the church metaphor come from? Was it before or after the ritual aspects emerged?
It was after. I think it was kind of, the joke is like we do this on Sunday mornings, right? So it's like this is how we go to church, right? This is where we go to have a space where we can reflect and be meditative, but we're reflecting and being meditative on live coding. So yeah, it kind of came up. It was supposed to be, it was kind of a joke, but it makes sense.
Oh, it does make sense, especially the Sunday morning. And you said you have the rituals, the worship session, right? You know, you have the audio visual team and the technicians. And Roger has asked, how long do these sermons last?
Yeah, they vary. I mean, sometimes, I mean, it really depends. If we're really in it, we'll keep going for an hour easily. Maybe more sometimes. If we're in a hurry, if we know we have to be somewhere, then we cut them short. But they can keep going.
What's the shortest sermon then that has been done?
15 minutes, maybe.
Okay, and we have a question from Alex. How do you manage your attention between visuals, code, and music? I feel it can be hard to attend properly to visuals while coding music, and maybe vice versa.
I'll answer the first part, which is to say, I think as a visualist, I have it way easier because I can hear while looking at my visuals. So it's much easier for me because Kate and Melody need to look at their code to write it, but I can hear no matter what I'm looking at. What do you guys think?
I think this is where having two of us comes in. Like I don't mind, because we're working on the same thing of code and troop, right? So I don't mind leaving it and watching or stepping back, or even like stepping back and doing something like if Sam comes running in and needs attention, I'll leave the computer and go help him and then come back. And it's because there's another sound person there who can drive.
Time for, I'll take like a break because there's Kate there driving. We can take a break versus like maybe by yourselves. If you took a break, you'd worry about maybe it getting boring, but not when there's two people.
Now we have, go on, Kate.
I was just gonna say, like the watching and doing feels more like, doable. Like, and I enjoy the watching part too.
Yeah, and we have a question from Georgios. Would you elaborate more on the ritual aspect during live coding? Is the ritual enhancing the experience and communication?
I'm thinking about in terms of how we start, maybe that ritual, like with the flashing, that one is something that's kind of emerged from like technical setup, because another key thing about Cody visuals, is that like we don't really, I mean, if we used if Sarah rather used AFFT in the future, that'd be cool and fine. But as of now, that's not like the case. And then Sarah, feel free to like jump in and talk more about, since it's your visuals and stuff. But like, that's like this idea of like just turning on and starting is like a huge part of like just how we've like started performing in general. And like, so like this turning on the flashing, that ritual is for technical, it has been for like technical reasons, setting up as a way to like cue and start at the same time. So like once Sarah's is going, somebody will run the Sonic Pi code, and then like that establishes the synchronization. Yeah, did you want to say Sarah?
Yeah, well, so I think that ritual is part of the ritual, or is part of the deity of the visual, right? Like, I don't use FFTs because I think in a lot of cases, the visuals in live code are like seen as this sort of support to music, which is the real thing that you're doing. And I don't feel that way. And I think that's very much not the case, as we've said in Cody. So I think that that is, so the beginning of the rituals, perhaps spending time paying attention to the deity of the visual. But in general, I think life coding, at least the way we do it, is a ritual structure as well, because we do have a sort of known structure that we work in, right? Like everybody does, because you need those constraints to know where you can be creative. And so it's that, we start a certain way because of the way we build up sounds and visuals, even though in the end where they go is different. There's a certain structure of like sparseness to fullness, and then you can sort of make some different detours in like the second half of the ritual in terms of how much fullness or sparseness or doing multiple passes through things, right? These are sort of the variations within the ritual that one can choose, and then it sort of ends one of two ways. So I think that that has a lot to do with what I would think of as like liturgical services, right? That it's like, I grew up Catholic, so I think of it in these terms, right? Mass is like very structured, and you know what's going to happen, and you know what you're going to say, and it's the freedom in between the things that's the freedom you experience. And so because we know the structure of how the generalized jam is going to go, you find the freedom in those middle spaces within that constraint. So that's where I would draw that metaphor.
Well, that was great. I felt like went to a sermon. So that was good. That was good. I felt like you said you don't do it in public, but I feel like I can understand the Cody. I don't know which deity I'm like underneath. Maybe I might choose maybe in the end of this session, I might choose one, but that was lovely to hear. And like I said, again, if y'all have any questions, y'all can ask during the chat. We will have a Q&A session after. Thank you very much, Sarah, Melody, and Kate.
Thank you. Yeah.
No problem. And lastly, we will have Dominic. Dominic, if you're ready, you can turn on your cam if you are going to turn it on, and you can screen share.
Yep. Hi everyone. I'm Dominic. Wait for it. Yeah. So basically, my process it's divided in two parts, which is first one the musical part and then the visual part. I use pure data for the visual part, and I mix it with a lot of hardware. Actually, I'm a very analog person, I would say. So I use sculptures, musical sculptures, and some scenes that I build up myself, and I connect them with pure data. So the first part is the music, and when I have the music done, I go ahead and start making the visuals. It's a really personal process. I would say that most of my work it's really reflected on my personal life, and what I really like about these two tools that I use, which is Pure Data and Hydra, is that they are both free, and I really have the idea that music should be free to make, maybe not free to consume, but yeah, free to make for everyone. And I'm a really logical person, so my process is really messy and logical too. I usually start up with the rhythmic part because my music is really rhythmic. But I'm done some ambient too. Then when I finish up with the music, I pretty much make like a base for me to improvise then later in the live coding part. But I usually just improvise with the visuals. I also really like that this tool that I'm using. It's open and it's web, so it's online and you can use it just online, like wherever you are, even from your phone. So you can be making visuals like in whenever, I don't know, if you're at work or whatever, you can just take a break and make a patch, and later I will reuse it for my live sessions. Also, as I said, I really love the hardware part that I use, and yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's all about my musical process. It's a short presentation, but it's really just me. It's you should go out and listen to the music. If you have any questions, you can also tell me.
Yeah, let me ask a question, because I sense a lot of what do you call it? I don't want to call it chaoticness, but
Yeah,
like the
no.
way you're talking about it, it seems like there is a lot of chaos. And with live coding, you know how we mentioned, like everyone has mentioned, like before that speaking, you know, there's a lot of reflection, but sometimes, because I think in the same way, so I understand. Sometimes all I want to do in a 3 minutes is just mash some code together and see how it is. So how do you control the urge to be chaos? Like, when do you know that I have crossed a line that, okay, I'm going to backtrack? Or is there no line ever when you are trying to like go through these like creative?
Yeah. Well, it's basically about listening to it, and if it sounds too messy to me, then I'll take a step back and rethink it and try to code it again, or just don't use that idea at all. I have a lot of rejected ideas, like a lot. I usually do not show like most of my work. Like most of my work is only for me, so I can build up around it, and then I don't like I don't like to I like to really, I don't know how to say it, but
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say, and if I'm mistaken, what you're saying is that, you know how sometimes we try not to be rejected by others because we want to be like perfectionists, but it seems that like in your practice, it's like, you know what? Who cares? I'm already going to, like, some of these ideas may not be good, but as long as I am able to get it out of my head, then I can like do the necessary fixes to a point where it can be shared, right? So talk about more with us that process, right? And that's, I think that's like what Alex even asks. Alex asks, how does live coding community fit in with your practice online or locally, right? Like, is there anything particular with the chaos or with like this notion that you can make pieces and reject them and then accept them? How does live coding aid that?
yeah, totally. Like for example, in pure data, people build up their own patches, so you can just use them. Like if you download that file, you can just use it as it is. But you can always see what's happening behind that, and look at the gods. And I think that even though it's something that is very technical, it does imprint like the personal type of making patches or coding. And then I like to recreate those patches. I'm very new to both pure data and Hydra. I've been using them like for 1 year, but the community on both tools it's really big, and I'm always like talking and about my patches and some other patches in Discord chats with both, which the cool thing about Hydra too is that it's a personal project. Like, it's made by one person, which is Olivia Jack, and I think that's really interesting. And the fact that it's free and online, and like pretty much it can be used in any operating system. I really like that too. But yeah, I don't know if I answered the question, but
No,
yes.
I think you did. So would you say that since because you mentioned that like sometimes you would just need 5 minutes to do some, do you think that having something that is open source, such as Pure Data, such as Hydra, helps you feel free because the process is free? So do you think it helps your mentality that like, since this is free and open source, I can let myself be open source? Like, you know how, because you keep talking about personal. So is it almost that like every line of code, it's an embodiment of your thoughts and feelings?
Yeah, I would totally say that. Like, I don't really like some people think that my music is mostly happy, but I think I do tend to pass through different moments with my emotions, and I think it's reflected right there in every line.
And so because I see that like you code in functions and whatnot. So you know, earlier, like, you know, when our Dan was speaking about like how the process of like steady and stuff. So so you know, Ardan seemed very controlled, right? Like
Yeah,
this and
yeah,
that. But it
totally.
seems that, would you say that would you say you're the complete opposite, or no? Because like it seems that you're mentioning chaotic, but it seems like you are aware of your thoughts and feelings. So how chaotic is it if you're actually listening to yourself?
Yeah, it's I think it's both chaotic and it does have some structure. Like, if it hadn't any structure, I wouldn't even present it at all, because I do like really structural things. Like, what I really like about electronic music is that it's very rhythmic and it's repetitive, right? So making those iterations, I think, helps and makes you build some structure and discipline too, and in your own art and music. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I'm just gonna well, we can stop the screen share and let everyone else that's in this
Yep.
panel, we can like turn it in, because I think what's nice about what you spoke about is that it has this segue to everyone else. So, because you know, when we're talking about the church before, we're talking about this control, but still room for improvisation. With the whole Thor thing, we're talking about making up your whole world. Oh yeah, everyone could like turn on their cameras because this is the group panel part, I guess. So don't worry. So I do like it. So with your thing, I'm actually interested to hear from Ardan, actually, because you know how your process, like you know how you were talking about steadying life coding. So how do you steady chaos, Ardan? Like, how would you approach steadying chaos?
I really like studying chaos, actually. What I mean is that basically, when I talk about studying things, I've tried in my experience to start with studying really easy thing, but study them really in depth. I mean, as I said, I used a really simplified version of my system for doing these studies with this representation systems, because of course the first instincts, at least to me, is when you have a machine that's so powerful like a computer and a library and a Livecoding library that's so powerful. Also, the first instinct is to insert every sample you've got, every kind of super collider sync you can imagine, and all the stuff, and it's my instincts too. But when it comes to really understand what you're thinking about when you're performing music, and to better organize your ideas, I think it's really important to designing actual constraints and to work with really few things, and try to understand them. After you've done this thing, it's a never ending things. I mean, but you know, after you try to understand yourself regarding your musical production, in terms of easy things, less things, and more kind of ordinate in some way, I think you find yourself in a more free to manage chaos and all other stuff. Don't know if I answered.
Oh yeah, I think you answered, and I think the chaos thing and control thing is actually very interesting. So I will go to the Cody's for that, because Sarah, especially I will go especially with you, because I think, like you said, like you're the deity of visuals and all that. How control or how chaotic do you like? Do you try to like control yourself because you know people are reacting to you, or do you sort of play with that? Because I know, like, I have talked to Kate many times. I know you see how Kate sometimes treat her dancers and all that. Like, you know, like I know you enjoy chaos, like, but as dancing and body, like you can play around with the chaos because there's the thing. But as Sarah, since you're the only visualist and you have two musicians, how do you play with that like chaotic or control feeling? Like, do you like try to keep things in pace?
So I think there's two elements to chaos in the visual that are both interesting to me. And the first element is that I have a certain amount of computing limitation, right? So in my heart, I'm kind of a maximalist, and I am happy to keep putting more visuals on, but I am stopped by the fact that there's only so much that an SVG on my laptop can handle before it gets angry at me. And that's an edge I can play with. You know, I've done shows where people are like, did you know you're dropping frames? And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. That's part of the deal. Like, the computer is breaking and that's good. But I have a natural constraint there. But something else that I think is interesting about chaos and visuals and sort of being able to be a maximalist is that I feel like because our rhythm is so strong, the maximalism never feels totally chaotic. Like, there might be a lot going on, but because it's set to a rhythm and the frame counter is so strong and like the timings are in sync, there's a deeper rhythm that's part of it. So if you watch it, when you get that sense of the rhythm, I think it doesn't feel chaotic, and instead you get these like brief moments where different rhythms overlap that like create a really cool effect where I'm like, oh, that looks so good, and then it never comes back because it was like such a complex like conjunction of all the different rhythms. So I don't feel particularly chaotic, but I think it's because I have structures that can make it so that I don't feel that way.
Nice. And talking about this, like, let's go on, because Melody, I know that like when you are with Cody, you do Sonic Pi, but I do know you also code and use Max MSP, if I'm not mistaken. So how do you translate this form of like control, or let's say skill? Because I guess when you're coding in Sonic Pi, it is not the same Melody that's coding in Max MSP, right? Would you say that you like, it's like, I don't want to say split personality, but not, I don't want to go that far, but would you say like it takes two different views? And do you think there would have been a difference if during Cody you were to code in Max MSP? Do you think the same rituals would have been conceived?
Oh, interesting. So something is, when we first started Cody, I tried using Max at first, actually. And that's just because I didn't know Sonic Pi and I already was using Max, right? And I ended up switching to Sonic Pi is because, or one of the reasons why I did was because it just, I felt like the affordances of Sonic Pi, the Sonic Pi to Sonic Pi combination of me getting my sound from Sonic Pi to her Sonic Pi sounded better than what I was doing with Max. I do think the affordances of like the musical tool, right, will lend itself to certain X, Y, Z, and you know, like, yeah. And so, I guess that does require a different personalities when approaching such different systems, or systems with affordances, or whatever, live coding stuff.
And then I guess I will just end it off with Kate for this one. Because like I asked that, like Molly, because I know also you are also a dancer and all that, so you're coding music. How do you think it would have changed the dynamics if you were being live coded? Like, because I know you do a lot of like improv choreography. So how do you think, like, have you ever like thought about that, letting like Molly be the sole musician and having Sarah visuals maybe control your body movements as a dancer? Has that occurred before in your head or whatnot?
Yes, in our heads. We haven't made it yet, but this is one of the Cody dream pieces. We actually have proposed this several times, but haven't gotten the funding to do it. But that is like, we would love to do a piece that also involves a dancer in sort of like an immersive visual environment with immersive sound as well. So like there's like this real combination of bodies, visuals, and sound all in a space, and thinking about space as sort of like the thing that pulls it all together. And how can we live code space between live coding and movement in space, I guess. So we're live coding movement of sound, movement of bodies, movement of visuals in a space. That's a dream Cody piece. So if anyone has space or funding, we have a project.
And Shelly had this question, and I think I'm going to ask this to Thor, because you have a deep electronic history. You're talking about raves, and we know raves can be chaotic and they go long. They go from like night to night. Sometimes people can go 24 hours. I don't know how. So Shelly was like, I think one of the interesting things about live coding is how to make some order from control chaos, something about navigating, structuring chaotic moments, right? And I think there's this misconception that electronic music or like raves are very chaotic, but like from we saw in your presentation, there's a whole mythology, there's a whole world that is built. So if you want to like dive into that a bit more, and then after you answer Thor, everyone else can like chime in on their thoughts on that.
I think or the way I sort of think of raves though is they were not so chaotic in their organization of it, perhaps in the musical style or the evolution of it, but it always seemed like sort of smaller parties building upon themselves. But I think you get the more that something happens, the more you don't start from scratch every week. So the more you're putting on parties, you evolve your own process for how to organize things. And so I think that's like similar to many other processes that way. It may start off chaotic in the beginning, but you work out what works, and then you sort of like incorporate that into your next time. There's still areas that you're always up for. So I feel like that's just a sort of natural progression of how you may start out with something you don't know what you're doing, but you earn your experience over time and you build upon that each time. So that was always my experience from raves and putting on parties. Like you go out to a big show, you might take some away from that, but when you start organizing your own shows, like very much in the beginning, you don't know what you're doing either. You don't know much about the sound system, the projectors, like who's coming, how to ticket, how to promote, all of these things you can learn and evolve over time. And that becomes like the crowd-funded knowledge, depending on who you're working on or who you learn from. And you from your own experience, you grow and learn from that over time, I feel.
If anyone else wants to chime in on that, like that whole, because I think especially since you journal, I think there is that thing of like, because I know for myself when I journal, there is that thing that like, okay, I might not be able to control this thing, but you know what, it happens. And I think sometimes it's just that, right? Sometimes control is allowing things to be chaotic because you still have that control. So
yeah, I think if you're comfortable within your framework, you can allow certain aspects to kind of chaotically out, because you know that the larger framework of the picture is still moving forward in some manner, and that you have multiple, it's almost like a recursive, you've got certain levels which can be more chaotic than others, but you feel comfortable within that if your overall movement is still in a somewhat of a going in a direction that you're content with.
Yeah. And if we have no one interjecting this, what I want to ask like all of y'all can answer this. And then one by one, because we are talking about journaling. And I know that like everyone might not say it, but everyone has a favorite line of code that like if they were in a pinch or whatnot, they will type. So like one by one, what is your go-to line in your language, and maybe just like give a snippet on why? Like anyone, all of you should answer this, maybe, hopefully.
I can, there is one, it's not one line of code, but it's one methodology which I've started picking up very much. And that's like, if you've got a pattern, a 16-step pattern, and you for loop it for I0 to less than 16, and you can play that, it's separating out playing the contents of that from the counting measure of it. If you introduce a different index, which is the length of your array, so you've still got 16 notes to produce, but rather than walking 0 to 15 and outputting them, you might, on one bar, on one measure, you might have this index just go to 3. So you've got 16 to produce, but you just do 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2 for 16. And then on the next measure, you increment that index. So then you're doing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you get these weird Mark Fell-like rhythms. And that's been my one go-to piece of code that I've been playing with a lot, like just this breaking up of the two different indexes rather than just using one index for your play location and what you're going to play. If you separate them out, you start getting these weird rhythmically evolving processes.
Who's next?
Well, every Cody rehearsal and every Cody show starts with just a live loop in Sonic Pi of the sample electric beep, the sleep of rate of 1. So we start everything with always.
Nice.
So for me, I have a set of animations. So writing animations live is technically possible, but it still takes me a while. It's one of those things that I'm always like, I should practice this so I can write it faster, but I don't. So I have one animation, it's an octagon that kind of goes in a loop and spins around. It is called BB6. There used to be like 5 other BBs and I don't know what happened to them. Like I deleted them because I hated them, but BB6 lives. And BB6 is my, like, if we're doing beeping and then all of a sudden there's more of like a whooshing or like a longer sound. By the way, I don't know how Kate and Melody put up with me talking about music the way I talk about music, so I don't know what anything is. I'm just like, when you do the weird whooshing noise, that's when I'm like, oh shit, I better get BB6 out. So that's my go-to line of code.
Why an octagon? Like, you know, most people say like hexagons or pentagons. Like, why an octagon?
Oh, because it's like a pointy circle. So I use circles a lot. And then if I want like a little bit more of a counterpoint to the circle, and I do have the other shapes, but the heptagon, so the 7-pointed one, has a point at the top. And then the octagon has a flat top. And so those two are like nice counterpoints to the circle. And like sharper things, triangles and squares tend to be more background. I don't really know why now that I'm talking about this, but yeah, it feels like a pointy circle.
Who's next? Dominic, you seem like you have something to say.
Yeah, for me, it's I really like making a kick bass with in pure data. It's really simple. You just make a ramp from 0 to 1 in 250 milliseconds. Then you get a line out of it and make and take the square root of that, and you multiply it so it can be a little bit louder, and then you make it you put an output with a cosine wave shaper, and then you have a bass kick bass right there. And in the visual part, I use rombo. I don't know how to say it in English, but rombos I don't know if it's the right, but these 4-shaped yeah. And I really like it because it's like the way the crystal grows. And I think that if you look under microscope lens, everything are crystals. So it's, to me, it's really like the substance of everything, the rombo. So I really like that one.
Yeah. Before we get to the other two, I just like the contrast of like how you're trying to go for the pointy shapes, whereas Sarah's going for like, I want this round but still polygon thing, because your circle is technically not a polygon. What is it? Yeah, I think it is. I think I'm screwing it up like that. But you know what I meant, like pointy shapes, like convex. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. It doesn't have convextance and all that stuff. Doesn't have, yeah. And then Arden, you're next, I guess, for this.
Quite difficult actually, but probably the method that I always go with is kind of masking the dust values in Super Collider, probably. So using defining very slow function of maximum and minimum density of grains and picking random within this mass. So I use it a lot, basically always in all my performances. So I think could be that, because I love chaos, basically.
And you, Melody, what is your go-to line of code or block of code?
Well, Kate already shared what we did for Cody. That's like the most go-to in our Cody situation. Could I share like a sample we've been using a lot or something we've been doing a lot of lately? Yeah, okay. So recently, Kate and I have been working a lot with these Roland SH samples as materials, and they're these really long loops of great textures. And that's been really, really fun. I think it's kind of given us like a new energy to what we were doing. Because like, there's the built-in samples of Sonic Pi, which are great, but we've been doing this for a while. And we just needed something to help spruce it up. So that's something we're excited about. That's now becoming like part of our regular, yeah.
That sounds good. And to give context of why I asked that, because I have looked at all my creative coding and live coding things, and I realized I have this affinity of always trying to put a modulo. No matter what language I'm in, there is a modulo. And for those that don't know, it's a percent sign. Because for whatever reason, I do not like while loops. So I would always have modulo and random. I have looked, and when I mean everything, I mean Sonic Pi, processing, Hydra. Like I always have a modulo and a counter. Like that is my thing. So I was like that, like I cannot be the only one. Like people have to have like go-to shapes and go-to code. And then the more I like it, I'm like, damn, I really do use modulo like all the time. And sine. I like sine, cos, and tan, like geometries. They really work very well. And like no matter the language environment. So that's why I asked that question. So yeah. So I think we are at the end of our session. I think this is a 90-minute session. I hope everyone enjoyed it. As you can tell, we went to church, we went to sci-fi, we learned the intro self-reflection, and we discussed chaos and control. And that's what like life coding is all about, right? Like everyone can journal in their own way. We all come with different backgrounds and different mentalities, but it doesn't take away from the performance, doesn't take away from anything. And even though we're both writing the same line of code, we come from it from a different mentality. So I hope everyone enjoyed this. And we do have 2 more sessions tomorrow, as in play and imagination. I don't know if the chairs of those want to briefly talk about it, or if we're just going to keep it a surprise for tomorrow.
We'll keep it a surprise.
Hi, Jack.
Yeah, thanks, Kofi. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.